Good evening. Welcome to This Week in Turkey. Tonight we'll be speaking about President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan's meeting with the US President Donald Trump. We're joined by Gönül, who is the director of Middle East Institute's Center for Turkish Studies in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Mrs. Toll.
Thank you so much for having me.
First, we'll be watching our video about the Trump-Erdoğan meeting, and then we'll be back with you in the studio.
President Erdoğan and his US counterpart Donald Trump held a meeting at the White House on May 16th. During the 20-minute-long meeting, the arming of the YPG and the extradition of Fethullah Gülen were on the table. In the press conference, Trump told the reporters that the US will support any effort to reduce violence in Syria and create a peaceful resolution alongside Erdoğan after the meeting, which he said was productive. Trump said his country offers support to the Turkish nation in its fight against ISIS and the PKK. On the other hand, Erdoğan raised the YPG issue, saying that using YPG militants in the fight against ISIS goes against agreements and will never be accepted. Erdoğan also added that Turkey will work with the US to fight against all terrorist groups in the region. Erdoğan also underlined that he hopes and prays for future cooperation in laying a new foundation for the Turkey-US relationship under Trump's presidency. Whereas Erdoğan went to Washington to discuss very important issues, namely arming of the YPG in Syria, the extradition of Gülen and the case of Reza Zarrab, the fact that the meeting lasted for only 20 minutes meant for many that the Turkish delegation left empty-handed. Besides, another event in Washington, D.C. took precedence over the Trump-Erdoğan meeting. 9 people were hurt and 2 arrests were made during a brawl at the Turkish ambassador's residence in the US capital during the visit by President Erdoğan. During the brawl, President Erdoğan's bodyguards were caught on camera beating up protesters. Concerning this incident, Senator John McCain reacted in bold tone yesterday. McCain said on MSNBC Thursday morning, "We should throw their ambassador the hell out of the United States of America." He added that this kind of thing cannot go unresponded diplomatically.
United States of America.
Welcome once again, Mrs. Toll. Let's start with a very straightforward question. What did Turkey gain from this much anticipated meeting?
Well, I guess that depends on how you look at it. If you look at it from Mr. Erdoğan's perspective, I think this was a photo opportunity. Standing side by side by the US President with the US President and shaking hands with the US President conferred a badly needed national legitimacy on Erdoğan, and after his contentious win on April 16th, and that legitimacy was denied to him by his European allies. So you look at it from that perspective, he got what he wanted. But if you look at it from the perspective of actual deliverables, I think he returned home empty-handed. Remember the issues that were on the agenda, YPG being the highest on the meeting's agenda. Of course, the Trump's decision was the new low point to arm. Was the new low point in Turkey-US relations, and that happened right before Erdoğan came to town. So I think the expectation on the Turkish side was that if Erdoğan personally, if he came here, he could be able to convince Trump and reverse his decision on the YPG, and that hasn't happened. We weren't expecting that to happen, but I think that was the expectation in Ankara. So the US is moving forward with his decision, and YPG will play the key role in the Raqqa operation. But of course, Turkey received some reassurances from the US that the YPG will not run Raqqa once the town is recaptured. And also, the US side assured the Turkish side that the weapons provided to the PYD will not end up in the hands of the PKK. That was another Turkish concern. And also, I think the Turkish government has long feared that the cooperation between YPG and the U.S. administration was not transactional, and it would go beyond the fight against the Islamic State, and that cooperation would enable the YPG to establish or hold on to the autonomous that it established so far. So that was the fear, and I think the U.S. side has reassured Turkey that was the case. And one day after the meeting, on May 17th, we held an event at the Middle East Institute featuring Jonathan Cohen, who is the Deputy Assistant Secretary, and he also reiterated the White House statement that the U.S. cooperation with the White House was merely transactional, meaning that we don't have a vision for the Kurds. We don't have a long-term vision. This is far from a strategic partnership. This is just transactional and operational cooperation. So that time was delivered to the Turkish delegation on Tuesday. And with regard to other issues that was on the agenda, the extradition of Gönül, for instance, I don't think Turkey there is a change in thinking on the U.S. side, because for a long time the U.S. has seen this as a very problematic issue that strained relations, because now the extradition of Fethullah Gülen is a legal process to begin with, before it's a political process. So, and it will be very complicated for the for the Trump administration to get involved or to interfere in the legal process. And I think this was also delivered to the Turkish side. And on the release of Reza Zarrab, I don't know if the issue came up during the one-on-one meeting, because it only lasted 20 minutes and there was speculation, so we could safely assume that the one-on-one meeting between President Trump and President Erdoğan was about 10 minutes. That doesn't leave them much time to discuss all the details on the agenda. So that's why I'm not sure whether the issue of release of Reza Zarrab was brought up. But if it was, I think, again, there are similar hurdles as we see in the extradition of Fethullah Gülen. The Reza Zarrab case, it's a legal process, it's in the hands of the courts now. Also now, it's part of the U.S. domestic political debate because of Trump's former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn's involvement with Russia. So that's why it's very difficult for the Trump administration to deliver what Turkey has been asking for on that. So that's why I think overall Turkey did not get much out of this meeting, maybe except for some promises on defense cooperation. Turkey might have received promises on sales on defense equipment, F-16 parts maybe, and also an agreement to deepen bilateral economic ties. But aside from that, on the key issues that's been on the agenda, I think he returned home empty-handed.
And as you know, the exiled Turkish cleric Fethullah Gülen, whose potential extradition was also on the table during the meeting, published a very critical piece on the Washington Post just a day before the Trump-Erdoğan meeting. So what, in your opinion, is the meaning of the appearance of this piece in the Washington Post just a day before the meeting? Is there a message associated here with the appearance of this piece?
Well, I think Washington Post is a very well-respected newspaper, and the fact that, well, some in Turkey argue that this just underlines the fact that how the U.S. administration sees Fethullah Gülen. But I think, well, there's independent media in this country, and at Washington Post, it's up to the editorial board, editor. Post to whether to agree to publish something or not. So I don't think this says anything about how the administration thinks, but I think it reflects the level of skepticism in Washington towards Turkey's argument on Fethullah Gülen. So I think the Washington crowd doesn't buy Turkey's argument, doesn't accept Fethullah Gülen network as a terrorist organization and as the leader of a terrorist organization. Because they wouldn't run the piece if they believed that he was a terrorist leader. So I think that's number one. And second, I mean, if you look at it itself, it's a very wisely written. If you don't really understand or know the history of Fethullah Gülen, I mean, he clearly speaks to a Western audience because he constantly mentions the Kurdish rights of Alevis, and he embraces the notion of democracy. So if you're someone who is not aware of the damage done to Turkish democracy by Fethullah Gülen and his network itself, you might easily. So if you're a person on the street in Washington or in the US reading this piece without knowing much about the person who penned the piece, you might think that this is a very legitimate piece. It raises legitimate concerns about Turkish democracy, and it makes valid points. But again, if you know enough about the history of the movement, then you'd be skeptical. So I think the fact that it was accepted, it was run by Washington Post, volumes about how convincing Turkey has been in terms of conveying its message to the Western audience, the terrorist organization, that it has destroyed Turkish democracy, or even I think it's Fethullah Gülen's involvement in the failed coup, because there is also skepticism in Washington about that, and I think part of that has something to do with how the government handled the post-coup process. I think a typical Western observer looks at Turkey and sees Erdoğan capitalizing on the failed coup and his opponents and some of his legitimate opponents, and is clamping down on media and his prosecution of journalists, and that raises the level of skepticism that is present in Washington. So I think the Washington Post piece points to that skepticism.
Now let's move on with the footage that was leaked of Erdogan's bodyguards beating up peaceful protesters just outside the White House. This footage ended up overshadowing the meeting itself, and it sparked a lot of criticism within the United States. And as we've heard in the news video just a couple of minutes ago, Senator John McCain said about the incident, I quote, "We should throw their ambassador the hell out of the United States of America." These are extremely strong statements, and they point to possible sanctions against the Turkish government. So how do you think an incident as such is likely to affect the image of Turkey in particular, and how is it expected to affect Turkey-US relations in general? Do you think there's a chance that the ambassador may in fact be sent, I quote, "the hell out of the United States of America"?
Well, as an answer to your last question, no, I don't think that's going to happen. But on the other hand, in terms of Turkey's image, well, it wasn't in a great place to begin with. And by the way, the incident happened not in front of White House, but in the Turkish ambassador's residence. And I think it's very unfortunate, given that the Turkish government spends millions of dollars a year on lobby firms to work on that image. And on the other hand, Erdogan visits town, and the same thing keeps happening over and over again. So this was the first instance where security detail was involved in a violent incident. This was last year. They were here, President Erdogan was speaking at Brookings, and a similar thing happened. And at the time, again, there was wide coverage. Washington Post, New York Times covered it, and we received several. The reaction, the feedback was horrible at the time. So now it's even worse, because this time it didn't just draw criticism from civil society organizations, from newspapers, but from also lawmakers, from Republican and Democratic lawmakers. And they wrote a letter to the U.S. president, to Turkish president, asking to be careful next time. So this also, if you live in Washington on a daily basis, you hear the lack of trust between the two countries very often, and how Turkey watchers are concerned about the state of Turkish democracy and what's happening in of speech, free media, rule of law, and also violence against Erdogan's opponents. So this brings home what people in Turkey experience on a daily basis. So that's why it's very important. But on the other hand, I don't expect it to really strain bilateral relations, because if Erdogan-Trump meeting was any indication of that, the issue of human rights was not brought in the meeting between Erdogan and Trump. And that speaks volumes in terms of how much Trump administration is concerned about state of Turkish democracy. And the only where human rights issue was brought was when Trump wanted the return of the American pastor who was captured in Turkey, and that, so there was no mention of what's happening to Turkish journalists, what's to freedom of speech, media. So there was no mention of that. And that tells us that the Trump administration is not concerned about that at all. And that shouldn't come as a surprise, because we've known from the get-go that the Trump administration repeatedly said that it would not concern itself with what's happening in its in the countries in the region. So that's why I don't expect the U.S. to expel the Turkish ambassador. If anything, we will hear from the State Department, from lawmakers in the U.S., from civil society organizations, some criticism, but I don't think it will go beyond that. But one maybe one thing that might come out of this incident could be now the U.S. police, the Washington Police Department, they issued a statement saying that they want those who were involved to be brought to justice. So, and that will require these guys, the people who were involved in the incident or part of Erdogan's security detail, they have diplomatic immunity. So we're seeing more and more people, including Washington Police Department, asking for that immunity to be removed. So that might happen. And the next time when Erdogan is in town, the U.S. might ask those men who were involved not to accompany the president. But other than that, I don't really expect anything beyond that to happen, let alone another strain or another point of contention between the two countries just because of that.
As you've probably followed also, the Turkish media has been using a lot of metaphors to make sense of the meeting between the two leaders, possibly because the immediate results of the meeting still remain unclear to most Turkish commentators. So in reference to these metaphors, what in your opinion does this meeting represent in Turkey-US relations? Borrowing the terms of the commentators, is it a period or is it a comma?
Well, it's not a period. And I think it was never realistic to expect a period in Turkey-US relations, given the context that we live in. The regional context especially, and given the U.S. administration's priorities in the region. So if you look at it from both sides, from the Turkey is still, it might be a reluctant partner, but it's an important partner in the fight against the Islamic State. At least it could be a spoiler in the fight against the Islamic State. That's the biggest U.S. worry, that you upset Turkey. Turkey could do something to spoil the ongoing operation, the Iraq operation. So that's why it's very important for the U.S. administration to keep Erdoğan on board. If you look at from the Turkish perspective, Turkey at this point, I don't think it can afford to alienate the U.S. Right before for the meeting, I think the AKP official hinted that they could close down Incirlik in retaliation to Trump's decision and further unilateral military action by Turkey in northern Iraq and northern Syria, and also a flirtation with Russia. They were on the agenda before Erdoğan came to Washington, just to signal that Turkey had other options. So Turkey has been trying very hard to signal to the U.S. that it has options. And I think Erdoğan's statement, I'm gonna go there, and this is gonna be the end of the conversation. So we'll end this. I think that was part of that PR project, and it was never realistic. Because after that, we've heard Mr. Erdoğan striking a very measured tone as well, saying that the U.S. administration is going through at the moment, and we have to be understanding and we have to be sensitive. So that's very atypical of Erdoğan. You would expect him to deliver a more aggressive statement after Trump's decision, given the high expectations in Ankara after Trump's election. But that didn't happen. So it just shows you that Turkey has very little leverage over Washington, and at the end of the day, it has to live with Trump administration's decision to work with the YPG. So that's why it will be business as usual for the Turkish side, because if you look at it from the US side, this is a historic decision. So it wasn't a period. It wasn't. Maybe it was a brief coma, but now. With Erdoğan, I think Erdoğan's visit to Washington ended. So I think business as usual. Not will change except for that lack of trust that's been marking the relations in the last few years, and that I think lack of trust deepened after Trump's decision, and also after Turkey's decision to move forward with unilateral strikes in northern Syria. So that it deepens the lack of trust, but on the other hand, neither side can afford to lose each other at such a critical time.
Mrs. Toll, thank you very much for your comments and for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
We'll continue with the next video. Our friend Zeynep Ekmekçi did an interview this week with the International Crisis Group Syria and Iraq Project Director Heiko Women, who talked about the latest developments in northern Syria and the PYD's relationship with the PKK.
They are, formally speaking, different organizations, but what matters, of course, is, in the end of the day, who decides? What is the chain of command? Who is at the top of the chain of command? And I think the answer is quite clear, that until now, the top of the chain of command is in Kandil, in northern Iraq, in the PKK headquarters. And if you go to northern Syria, which we do, and if you talk to the cadres of the PYD and of the YPG, I mean, you pretty much exclusively encounter people who have spent time in Kandil, sometimes quite long times, who are steeped in the ideology of the organization and who are, while Syrian, still committed to the larger PKK framework and leadership. Now, if you talk to them at length, I mean, you realize that many of those people are, in fact, quite ambiguous. I mean, they tell you one thing one day on one occasion, they tell you another thing on another occasion. Many of them clearly see that what they have in Syria is something that has a value in its own right. Mm-hmm. That it is a project that might be worth preserving, and that you may not want to sacrifice for this larger struggle. You would not want to go as far as provoking Turkey into considering military intervention or whatever it might be to actually destroy this project. And people are torn. I mean, the leadership, many of them in the leadership level appear to be torn between these two objectives or these two options, and they make contortions, I would say, intellectual contortions, to claim that both are actually can be pursued at the same time, which I think is not realistic.
Our friend Sinan Akgünay did an exclusive interview with Garanti Bank's China representative Noyan Rona. Mr. Rona talked about Erdoğan's recent visit to China and China's most recent project to revive the Silk Road.
Turkey has signed certain bilateral agreements with China. I think Turkey forms an important part of this project. Turkey is one of the countries which holds the longest territorial routes within the project. Therefore, the project brings many opportunities for Turkey. However, it is important to mention that both for the project to succeed and also in order to realize the benefits of the project, there's a lot of things Turkey must do. Turkey needs to increase mutual trust enhancing activities with China, like establishing a stronger cooperation in terms of regional terrorism, as well as developing regional projects within the Silk Road. Developing concrete regional projects will accelerate the development of the Silk Road and increase the opportunities for Turkey. Moreover, Turkey can finance these projects through the Chinese funding sources. For example, Turkey is a member of the Asian Development Bank, so it can develop projects which can be financed through the funds of this bank. Doing so, I believe that with the project, the bilateral relations between Turkey and China will gain momentum and diversity. For instance, when the railroad construction is completed, Turkey will hold a very important route for the transfer of the Chinese products to the European market. Also, with the access to the new route, on one hand, many new tourists will be able to come to Turkey, and on the other hand, many new individuals will permanently come and invest in Turkey. As a result, I believe that the investments of the Chinese companies to Turkey will increase, which will also increase the current $30 billion trade volume with China and create an opportunity for Turkey to close its trade deficit. Furthermore, regarding to other countries, it is important to mention that there are certain countries who do not support the project, and there are certain countries who have different expectations for the project. According to calculations, for the project to be completed, we need around 35 to 50 years. Therefore, countries need to be patient and maintain their interests in the project, and China, as the owner of the project, is responsible for maintaining the interest.
The security forces conducted an operation this morning targeting an executive and 3 staff members of the critical daily Sözcü over their alleged links to the Gülen movement.
The state-run Anadolu Agency claimed today that a criminal court in Istanbul issued arrest warrants for 4 staff members of Sözcü Daily, including the owner Burak Akbay, who is allegedly outside of Turkey. Anadolu Agency also said the journalists were accused of committing crimes on behalf of the terrorist organization, even though they are not members of the organization, assault against the president, and armed insurgency against the Turkish government. İsmail Yılmaz, the lawyer for Daily Sözcü, said a search and confiscation warrant had been issued by the prosecutor. Yılmaz denied that arrest warrants had been issued and that the warrants had only been issued to seize and search staff members' belongings. However, Yılmaz confirmed that Mediha Olgun, the executive in charge of the Sözcü website, was in custody, adding that this could be in connection with another investigation. Istanbul Chief Public Prosecutor İrfan Fidan told that the operation only targeted the executives of the daily, including its license holder Burak Akbay. Fidan said, "The operation is about the executives of Daily Sözcü. Akbay is already a fugitive and there is an arrest warrant for him. There are detentions and the investigation is ongoing. Proceedings are only being conducted against its manager and some staff members." Sözcü, whose name translates as spokesperson, is the third most read paper in Turkey. It is known for its fierce anti-government and anti-Erdoğan stance. Pro-government media claim that Sözcü and its owner Akbay have close ties with the Gülen movement, which is accused of orchestrating the failed July 15th coup attempt. The opposition denies the link between the Gülen movement and Sözcü and claims that the operation against Sözcü is just a new step to extend media pressure in Turkey.
The AKP and HDP will hold extraordinary congresses this weekend. President Erdoğan is expected to assume the AKP's leadership, while it remains unclear who will replace the HDP's co-chair, who's currently in jail.
Two political parties, the ruling AKP and the pro-Kurdish HDP, will hold extraordinary congresses this weekend. On Saturday, May 20th, the HDP will have an extraordinary congress to replace its jailed co-chair, Figen Yüksekdağ. In February, Yüksekdağ was stripped of her seat in the parliament after her conviction on terrorism charges. It still remains unclear who will replace Yüksekdağ. In May last year, the Turkish parliament voted to lift MPs' immunity from prosecution, and in the following months, several HDP MPs were arrested and put in jail due to accusations of ties to terrorism. At the moment, there are 12 HDP MPs in jail, including co-chairs Selahattin Demirtaş and Figen Yüksekdağ. Other HDP MPs still remain in custody, awaiting trial. At the Congress, the HDP is also expected to announce a new roadmap for the resolution of the decades-long Kurdish conflict in the country. Our party will start to prepare a call for democracy, which will embrace all segments of the society, said the HDP spokesperson Osman Baydemir. On Sunday, May 21st, the AKP will also hold an extraordinary congress in which President Erdoğan is expected to regain party leadership. Erdoğan had to leave the AKP in 2014 when he became Turkey's first elected president by popular vote. Constitutional changes allowing the president to be a member of a political party were approved in the April 16th referendum and went into effect this month. In 2019, Turkey will have presidential and general elections, and the AKP will run in these elections under the leadership of Erdoğan.
Nuriye Gülmen and Semih Özakça are on the 72nd day of their hunger strike to protest the ongoing government purge against public officials. Gülmen and Özakça lost their jobs following a state of emergency decree.
Nuriye Gülmen, an academic, and Semih Özakça, an elementary school teacher, have been on hunger strike for 72 days to protest a government purge which has cost them and tens of thousands of others their jobs by a state of emergency decree. Both teachers have lost their jobs after the Turkish government forcibly fired thousands of academics, bureaucrats and civil servants from their offices. According to The Guardian, more than 1,500 university academics were forced to resign, and 35,000 public servants have been sacked in a civil purge. The purges are widely criticized for their seemingly arbitrary nature under the ongoing state of emergency, which was enacted in the wake of the controversial coup attempt on July 15th last year. People who lose their offices by the state of emergency decrees are not treated as de jure criminals, thus they are not jailed, but they can no longer work in the public sector. Private sector companies who might hire them also face legal repercussions from the state institutions. This decree also prevents the recipients from leaving the country as it annuls their passports and denies them any visa applications. The state also cuts off their unemployment pensions. After losing their academic positions, Gülmen and Özakça both claimed that they were unjustly and unlawfully fired from their jobs. The two educators have now been on hunger strike for the last 72 days. After losing their academic positions, Gülmen and Özakça both claimed that they were unjustly and unlawfully fired from their jobs. The two educators have now been on hunger for the last 69 days. Prime Minister Binali Yıldırım criticized the backlash from the protest, claiming that the activists are not legally charged or jailed. The hunger strike was also ridiculed by trolls and pro-government social media users. Many civil society groups and members of the main opposition party CHP also recently visited Gülmen and Özakça and pleaded them to end the strike before their health condition deteriorate further. However, Özakça told the delegation that there is no point ending the strike before seeing any concrete statement from the government about our situation. 541 artists and academics also issued a statement supporting the hunger strikes. All democratic protests against the state of emergency and arbitrary decrees are valid and justify a rightful demand for justice.
Our friend Elif Akbıyık did an interview with Jean-Christophe Maillot, whose adaptation of The Swan Lake was staged in Istanbul this week.
The spirit, there is something close from the original ballet, but I must say my story is very different. And that's why I call it not Swan Lake, I call it Lake. It's for me like the dark version of Swan Lake. The story in Swan Lake, it's pretty stupid. It's a man that fall in love with a swan. Now, which man will fall in love with a swan? It's something very poetic, but I don't think it's something real. In my story, the ballet is starting with a movie where you see the prince when he was very small, how he fell in love with a very young girl that was his age, from 7 years old. And all his life he will try to look for that young girl that he has seen when he was very young. And he's fighting to have the chance to one day meet her, because the parents of the prince want him to get married. But they want him to get married with a girl that he doesn't want. He wants to marry. It's the story of every human being. We want to marry the person we love, not the person people force you to marry. And his fight will be to look for that girl all his life. Even if at the end he has to die with her. He'd rather, you know, it's a tragedy. It's like Romeo and Juliet, in a way. It's like you'd rather die with the person that you love than to get married with the person that you don't love. And from the original, you see in the original version, all the swan have beautiful tutus. Here there is no tutu. Why? Because, you know, a swan is not so sweet. Swan can be very evil, can really grab you. And I wanted to work more on the dimension of the animals than on the kind of romantic way of seeing ballet. And the music is very close from the original version, even if it's shorter, because in the original ballet there is many moments where it's just music to divert the audience with some nice dance. For me, every single moment in the ballet is telling something important in the story. So again, it's just a way to keep a traditional ballet in the life of today, you know, in the time of internet, Facebook. Everything that is moving around us is very different. So how to connect with the audience in our days with a story that's a little bit more exciting. It's almost like a thriller. You almost follow it like a real thriller in the TV, and you really try to understand what's going to happen next until the end. I don't tell you about the end, you have to see it.
No spoilers.
Now let's have a look at what's on in Istanbul this weekend.
It is the most exciting phase of Europe's most important basketball competition, the EuroLeague. Four teams will compete for the title in the playoffs: Real Madrid, Fenerbahçe, Olympiacos and Medyascope. This will be the Fenerbahçe's opportunity to take its revenge from last year's Final Four in Moscow. The tournament will take place in an atmosphere of madness, so do not miss it. Sports and music will be united this weekend at Zorlu PSM in cooperation with Digiturk beIN Sports Turkey. Tonight you can watch the matches on big screen and warm up yourself for Friday night at the Silent Disco Party with DJ Ece Özel's special sets just after the second match.
Loca, loca, te volviste loca y disparaste frente a mí, que te habías enamorado hace unos años sin decirme nada, entonces la emoción.
Chill Out Festival Istanbul is carrying the standards it had set for Turkey even further with its 12th edition, accompanying a unique and free atmosphere right in the arms of nature, enlivening cultural and creative activities, carefully created shopping spaces and luscious catering options. This year's Chill Out Festival Istanbul will offer a music selection more diverse than ever. Istanbul's breathing area, Life Park, is reserved for a time out from the urban clutter for this weekend. 2-day pass price 216 Turkish liras. Just a couple of weeks left to visit the Istanbul Modern Exhibition. Liman, which will end on the 4th of June, the exhibition focuses on ports and harbors. Focusing on Istanbul's relations with the sea, Liman looks closely at how art in Turkey has presented the cultural and social life that has developed on the coasts and around the ports of the city of the end of the 19th century to the present day. This is the last exhibition before the museum undergoes a major renovation.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. Thanks for tuning in and hope to see you again next Friday at 9 p.m. Bye.